Good evening, everyone. We're going to have Nicole Carmichael do our welcome. President.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Nicole Carmichael, and I'm the chapter president of the Trenton Alumni Chapter, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to our Throw Down Your Armor, our health and wellness speaker series. I'm excited to hear all of the information that will be shared from our two panelists and also the rest of you. I don't know about you, but many times I feel that we have to walk around and be that strong woman, just like the song just said, the superwoman. So tonight we're going to take that S off our chest. We're going to throw down that armor, and we're going to receive all the information that we need so that we can be stronger. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. My name is Monica Kelly, and I will serve as your co-host tonight, along with Danielle Hamilton and Bianca Taylor Davis. Before introducing the panelists, I'd like to attend to a few housekeeping details. First, shortly you will see pop up on your screen a few questions. We're giving you about 30 seconds to answer each one. If you would do so, we would really like your input and we want to assess where you are with these topics before we start the panel discussion. And then we're going to be asking the same questions at the end to see if you've changed your opinion or how you've been influenced by the information you've been presented today. Secondly, we want you to ask questions. So in your chat, please ask as many questions. If you're like me, they come and they go. So just type them in as you think of them. And at the end, we'll put as many of your questions as we can to the panelists before we close out for the evening. And finally, at the end of the program, you will receive a link in your chat. This link will be for a survey, asking you questions, obviously, to evaluate the program tonight. And we really would like your feedback, so we encourage you to complete it, and it'll help us in planning next year our programming events. So we're just waiting for some of those questions to be answered, and we're going to share the data with you. So April will get that information shortly, or should we wait until the end of the presentation?
I can share that out with you now if you like.
Sure, we can see where we are or where the audience is. So 100% of the attendees tonight who participated consider themselves a strong Black woman. I am not surprised by that. What do we have next? Okay, interesting. And the last one. Right. That's very positive. I'm sure Dr. Johnson is very pleased to see that. Okay. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to introduce our panelists. Today or tonight, we have with us Dr. Dion Johnson. Dr. Johnson obtained her master's degree in theology and her PhD in clinical psychology from Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. Prior to that, she received a master's degree in marriage and family therapy from California State University, San Bernardino. As a clinical psychologist, she has worked with many different populations, including the chronic and seriously mentally ill, those who've been involved in the justice system, as well as individuals, families, and couples. I mean, that's just at minimum. She's the founder of Truth and Heart Ministries and the owner and CEO of Juvenile and Adult Reentry Connection, which is a behavioral health agency serving at-risk youth and adults returning to the community from various correctional facilities. In her spare time, doesn't sound like she has much, right? She's a motivational speaker, a community leader, an author who enjoys spending time with her family, being a foodie, and taking day trips. Happy to say that she's a representative of one of the Divine Nine organizations. Dr. Johnson is a member of Alpha Kappa Sorority Incorporated. Next, we'll have Sora Kendra Woodfolk. Yes, she is a Delta. She hails from Havelock, North Carolina. She is currently a doctoral student in the history department at Howard University. Prior to attending Howard, she received a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Acting and Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and a Master of Arts in Performance Studies from New York University. A storyteller by nature, Kendra chose to pursue a doctorate in history to illuminate the truth about Black women's history, Black theater history, Pan-Africanism, the cultural praxis of Black Americans, social justice, and Black spiritual life. Her doctoral research will focus on the spiritual practice of Black women in the 20th century, who engage in both Black American Christianity and traditional African spiritualities. At the completion of her PhD journey, she hopes to engage in teaching at the collegiate level, consulting, and documentary filmmaking. Dr. Johnson, Kendra Woodfolk, thank you so much for spending time with us today, and we're going to commence with our panel discussions. So the first question is, research suggests historical legacy of chattel slavery serves as the foundation of the strong Black woman archetype. Can you expand on this? What were the characterizations ascribed to Black women? How were they used to justify our maltreatment? And why was the personification of such characteristics necessary for personal and communal survival?
Kendra, would you like to go first, or do you want me to?
I would love to.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Sure.
So, my response to this question is mostly going to come directly from the work of Dr. Jennifer Morgan, who is a professor of history at NYU. And she has written a book called Laboring Women, in which she details exactly how European colonials, upon first encountering African women, their descriptions of them were directly connected to the institution of slavery. So upon seeing African women living their day-to-day lives and directly related to their birthing of children, they described them as beastly. They described them as being able to endure increasing amounts of pain without crying out or without belaboring the fact that they were in pain. And they took those attributes ascribed to those women and decided, well, these are the types of beings, not people, that we can enslave, because obviously if their women are not like our women, their people are not like our people. And so they use that as a catalyst, or as their excuse even, to begin chattel slavery. Dr. Morgan goes on to describe basically the fact that we didn't cry out during labor in the same ways that white women did. The fact that we were able to handle birth, and then after birth, the fact that we had bodily autonomy enough to not sleep with African men in order to create birth spacing. They took that as we were not like white women, for lack of a better way to put it. So that begins the way that European and white people would then view Black women specifically as those who don't experience pain in the same ways that other people do. So that is the start of why we later see Black women not being prescribed pain medication at the same rate as white women when we experience surgery or childbirth or, you know, anything else that would cause anyone pain. We are viewed as not experiencing the same level of pain as those people. It's why it was easy to experiment on our bodies during chattel slavery. All of that can be directly connected to the journals of these Europeans who were viewing African women for the first time.
I'm not, is it okay for me to respond?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure how many of you all have seen the movie 12 Years a Slave, but there is a striking scene in that movie, one of them, but this one stands out the most still to me to this day. In the very beginning, the first plantation that Solomon arrived at with the other slave woman, and I believe it was her daughter who was sold, or both of her children. This was the first time that she was ever separated from her children, and she was expected to just get up and carry on and move on. And so her tears, her pain, her moaning, her soul was crying out. Those were soulish. That was a soulish cry. Her spirit was injured. And so we see in that scene, she's so distraught. She's so overwhelmed. It wasn't just grief. It was her foundation was uprooted to have never seen her children again. And the slave mistress comes over to her, or is so bothered by her crying that they can't focus. She's disrupting the energy, the mood, the operational procedures, if you will, of the plantation. And Solomon goes over to her and says, pretty much, you need to get it together because you're going to mess it up for all of us. And for me, that is so striking as it relates to our affect, our emotional expression, how in that instance, how we were not only seen as not human, but we were seen as just this otherness where it did not matter what they did to us. And even what we co-signed our own ripoff in that moment as it related to all of our well-being and survival. I think it's interesting that a Black man came up to her and told her that. And so affectively and emotionally, expressively, those are the foundations. That is the origin from which I believe historically, culturally, and clinically, where we had to suppress, deny, repress, constrict each other. And especially for a Black woman now, because I've seen a lot of times therapeutically where it's presented where we're not even comfortable with our own affect, with our own emotional experiences, least of all other people feeling uncomfortable. We've bought into our own ripoff for our survival. Maybe not so much now. I do think therapeutically there are spaces where it's okay for us to do that, but we've become so constricted that that stifling, that denial, that suppression of our emotions and our reactions contributes to a lot of ongoing maladjustment, intrapersonally within ourselves and interpersonally between each other.
Yeah, I would love to piggyback on that just a bit to say that a Black woman being vulnerable in public is a revolutionary act. And I would say that it being a revolution program. And in expressing it with my professors, they told me to use my work to try to work through my trauma. And so I took on that entire year. I was getting my master's program. I decided that if I needed to cry, I would cry wherever I was. So for a whole year, I cried in public. I cried at work. I cried on the subway in New York. I cried in the classroom. I cried everywhere and just took notice of people's levels of discomfort with my trauma. And, you know, there were different times where, you know, I experienced a Black woman on the train just wanting to give me a hug. I experienced, you know, people kind of looking at me like, you know, what's wrong with her? Or, you know, she needs to go on somewhere. I experienced other students, you know, wanting me to be quiet. And just, you know, giving people a full up close and personal, watched my heart break all over New York City for a whole year. And how unusual it was. And I had friends of mine express to me how brave they thought it was that I would cry in public. And I was thinking to myself, it's really not all that brave. I can't help it.
Yeah, but it's still risky though, because we're still dealing in, we're still, that legacy, those residuals are still very much ingrained. And, you know, when we enter into these workspaces, these expectations about our, the angry Black woman, our affect, how we, you know, code switch in terms of our demeanor, our affect, our nonverbals, our diction, you know, how we are constantly given the feedback and the signal that it's not okay, or that our affect, even if it's joyful or if it's happiness, that an expression of our affect, of our emotions is not tolerated. And so it's very risky, especially when you enter into more predominantly, I believe, white spaces, graduate school, you know, the feedback that you're given in class and from your professors, the feedback that you're given non-verbally from your supervisors, from your colleagues, from your coworkers, our tears, our emotions are still not seen. And I believe that bias, some people are explicitly racist. We all know that, but I think more people, at least from what I've experienced therapeutically and professionally, that bias, that discomfort is so unconscious, and it operates very much at an unconscious level, at a macroscopic level in our society, at large and micro within our one-to-one interactions. It's just, it's so risky still. And so what that potentially predisposes or leaves some of us vulnerable to from a mental health perspective, we just cannot ignore. We just got to be able to speak to that.
Absolutely. And in my writing about it, after the fact, I talked about how privileged I was to be in spaces that allowed me to do that. Because I recognized that, you know, I was in a corporate job, but it was a corporate job full of artists. So, you know, that makes a huge difference. I was at NYU, which is a very white institution and an incredibly racist institution, if I do say so myself. But I was in performance studies. So, you know, these people, and even there, I still experienced backlash. You know, I had a student stand up in the middle of a class and do a 30-minute diatribe about why he did not want to hear me speak. And I was the only not Black woman, the only Black person in the room. And we were talking about Black people in this class. And the professor kept asking me questions. So the reason I was speaking is because I had been asked to. And then this young man felt enraged about the fact that I had an opinion about what we were talking about.
And hearing your voice was being preferred.
Yes.
Over his.
Yeah. So, you know.
So all of these micro and macro assaults that we experience, that a lot of times historically, for our survival, for the survival of our children, for the preservation of our families, our communities, we just gotta stuff it.
Yeah.
And the impact that has on us.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, it's devastating.
Even in that, in that time when I was being berated, I said nothing. I just sat there because I felt in that moment, if I responded in the way in which I wanted to respond, I would have been the problem. And so he went on, and I waited for the professor to, stop him, and he never did. It actually was another graduate student who was TAing in the class who stood up and said, okay, this is done. But the professor never said anything. And so it's like, who is going to, part of the reason why Black women have to take on this strengthened role is because who is going to protect us? Who is going to cover us? If I am being vulnerable, if I am, showing my belly, who is going to cover me? Who is going to be my armor? And so Black women have had to take on a particular amount of armor because we don't have anything external oftentimes that is going to shield us or protect us.
And that's a perfect segue into our next question that comes from Taylor Gayton et al. And in her article, she wrote, "I'm good. Asserted Black mothers hold high expectations of their daughters through socialization practices that include increased responsibilities and demands, grooming them to adopt an identity rooted in strength as a rite of passage for the preservation of family and community." So this is a two-part question. How does this impact the mother-daughter relationship if one fails to live up to or reject the role assignment? And the second part of this question is, how do we begin to change the narrative?
Would you like to start here, Dr. Johnson?
I think for so many of us, or I would hope for the majority of us, we are used to seeing our elders, our mothers, our grandmothers, our aunts deal with loss in silence. So we know there's trauma there, but they never explicitly, oftentimes, speak to that, express their emotions, express what they're going through appropriately. And so that oftentimes sends a nonverbal but very explicit message that's modeling. And so we're taught oftentimes that is what we are to not only mimic, but that is what we are to emulate. And then when life happens, as it always will, in our lives, I have seen professionally and personally that sometimes if we don't, or if we fail to sometimes live up to what we were modeled, or somehow we're not able to press through or to get up every day and persist and push through in the way that we've seen our elders do that, we in turn feel like we're not living up to that expectation. And sometimes we can be explicitly told that as well. And so I think for me, it's important to begin to unpack or to reimagine what we identify as strength. Because a lot of times strength is often synonymous with suppressing, not speaking to what we're dealing with or how we're feeling, and often putting other people's needs constantly ahead of our own, even when our children are good, no matter their age. And so I was challenged with this process, with this construct over the last 18 months. My husband and I, we lost our little one on New Year's Day last year. And I remember constantly feeling like and telling him, I wish I had my grandparents here, both paternal and maternal grandparents, because both sets of my grandparents experienced tragic losses. My one grandmother, she lost her first two children of stillbirths. Then one of her sons died in a motorcycle accident at the age of 19, right after church. My other grandmother buried her newborn son days after he was born. And years later, she lost all three of her sons, the first two within 2 weeks of each other. And the second son, he was beat to death by a bat in prison. And so these losses that I'm sharing with you, I remember seeing what they were doing growing up, but my mother, we never spoke to it. I even remember seeing a picture of one of my uncles in the family album, not knowing who it was, but he was in a casket. So I said to my mom, I said, who's this? And she just tensed up, she froze. And she got this glazed over look on her face. I said, Ma, who's this? And she wouldn't respond. I was like 6 or 7. And so I said, well, I'm gonna go ask grandma about this. She said, no, don't ask mama, because that's gonna make her sad. That's gonna make her cry. And so early on in that moment, it was very clear and obvious to me that when these kinds of things happen, you don't speak to it, you don't acknowledge it, you don't even speak explicitly to your pain. And so when we lost our little one last year, my husband and I was just like, how are we going to get through this? I didn't know. It took me almost a year to be able to begin to speak to how I was feeling. But within that year, I learned how to say no. I learned how to let my daughter be. And she saw me very differently. For the first time, she explicitly saw me in pain. And we talked about what was happening. And she's 14 and a half in high school. So it was a very age appropriate process. My daughter was there in the hospital room with me. And so she was up close and personal when we lost her little sister. And so one of the ways we begin to change or to unpack to help each other explicitly develop necessary tools and resources, we got to be able to speak to these things. We have to not be afraid or reluctant to allow those that we love to see us more vulnerable. And therapeutically, I cannot tell you how many times I see mothers in particular struggle with that. Mm-hmm. Fathers, once I connect with the father and he opens up, more often than not, it's a little easier for him to be vulnerable about his limitations than it is for his wife. And so and I understand that a lot of times there are gender differences in terms of our roles and responsibilities. But folks, I got to tell y'all, when I'm in there, when I'm sitting with couples, a lot of times, sometimes we back ourselves into that corner. The husbands will say, well, you don't have to do all of that. Or the significant other will say that. And the wife will say, well, why do you let me do it then? And then the husband will say, well, do you think I want to volunteer to clean the house? Do you think I want to volunteer to run errands? But I will do it if you just step back and let me do it. Mm. And so I think those are some of the ways foundationally and structurally we begin to shift that narrative.
Ooh. First of all, my deepest sympathy to you and your family. I can't even imagine. So I'm going to give a little bit of historical context to, the ways that mothering specifically was impacted by enslavement. And so, you know, you start out with one, not being able to 100% claim your children from the onset, because you don't know when and if they may be taken from you, either physically separated from you or, you know, killed, unfortunately. And so that puts mothers in a specific space of either trying to give their children as much as they can, as fast as they can, or being completely detached. And so as these children grow, especially girl children, we are concerned with, how do I keep my child from being raped? How do I keep my child from experiencing child loss themselves? And so as all of these things, we can see how they are still affecting mothers and daughters right now. How do I parent alone? Because if I, you know, what if my husband is sold away from me? What if the master is my child's father? What, you know what I'm saying? All of these different, you know, possibilities are impacting enslaved women constantly. And so there isn't a lot of room for them to cuddle with their babies or, you know, kiss boo-boos and all of that, you know, lovely, fluffy things. And so, you know, me personally, my mother's watching. Hey, Ma. My mother is a very straightforward woman. And I'm the oldest of 3 girls, and it's just us girls. And so I feel like my mother felt like it was her responsibility to prepare us for how ugly the world could potentially be. And that is a position I feel like a lot of Black mothers find themselves in, where it becomes more important to you to make sure that your child is equipped for the world. And so, you know, I love my mother very much, and she did an incredible job. Me and my sisters are phenomenal women, if I, you know, can brag on us for a second. But there is, you know, wasn't a lot of space for the fluffy stuff. That's not where my mother is. And I am grateful for that now. But I can see the ways that the world is responsible for that. And so, you know, I am a very soft person. Anybody who knows me would say that I will fall to pieces at the drop of a dime. I had to keep my whole life together while Dr. Johnson Williams was speaking just a minute ago, because I am a bucket. You know, I will cry. And so, you know, my mother growing up would be like, suck it up, let's keep it moving, we gotta go. And her being like that prepared me for when I was falling apart in my master's program. I was able to fall apart but get my work done. I was able to fall apart but graduate with a 4.0. I was able to be crying on the train, but my homework was turned in on time. And so while there is some difficulty in, you know, mother-daughter relationships in the Black community because of the necessity for Black mothers to prepare their daughters for the world, there is also the space where if my mother had not prepared me in the ways that she did, I would be somewhere crazy, you know, not being able to sustain myself or take care of myself if I had not been equipped to, even in my breakdown, break through. And so, you know, both of those things have to happen, because unfortunately we are in a world that disproportionately treats Black women like dirt. We get stepped on, you know, as Malcolm X said, that we are, you know, the most mistreated group of people in the world, the Black woman. And so it's trying to find the balance for me. You know, I am fortunate enough to be helping to raise an amazing 3-year-old little girl. And so I try to make it my mission to create a space where she can have her feelings. You get to cry, you get to be upset. And now that we're through the upset, where are we going next? What are we doing next? How do we move through? She's 3. So, you know, a lot of that is like, I'll clean it up now. But, you know, as she grows older, it is my hope that we will be able to strike the balance between how she deals with the world as it is and creates a space for her vulnerability.
We've got to be intentional about that, though, because sometimes, because we're so used to the world in which we live necessitates our being on. We got to get up, we got to do this, we got to do that. You have to be intentional and you have to be deliberate about that in terms of what you model, what you say, what you communicate, what we say and communicate to our daughters. Like, because I can be like that too. I've already shared with you guys a paradigm shift that occurred in my childhood in terms of affect and how you just press through. And so sometimes I can be a little too straightforward. I said something to my daughter a while ago. She's such the child of a psychologist. I said something to her just straight from the hip. She said, "Oh, Mom, you hurt my feelings. Why did you say it like that?" I said, "Listen, that world in which we live is not going to care anything about your feelings. You got to be able to wade through some of that to hear the message." But she still was like, "Mom, but you hurt my feelings. I didn't like how you said what you said to me." And that is so crucial, you guys. She wasn't disrespectful about it, but I've been there repeatedly in spaces, in places where people don't care, and as we all have, as you shared, as many of us have, where they don't care about our feelings or response. But we have got to slow down and be able to take the space and time to begin to love on ourselves deliberately and more, and allow our children, our daughters in particular, to hear them. See, the only way we're going to be able to effectively hear them and respond to them in that moment, we've got to be able to contain that. We've got to be able to sit within that vulnerability, that space ourselves, because we cannot give our children, our daughters in particular, what we don't have. And so I think we've got to learn how to give ourselves permission, take a few moments in the bathroom or a few moments in the car, however it is, you need to process that. You need to acknowledge that part of yourself that is wounded, that is hurt, speak to that, injure it, do something that heals, that's a balm to that, so to speak. We've got to learn how to drop our armor in that way. And that takes time, and that takes a lot of deliberate intentions.
Absolutely. It's so meticulous.
Yes.
Trying to find the ways in which you can, one, prepare a daughter for the world and how ugly it can be, while also reminding them that you will be the soft place to land.
Yes.
And so it's like, it's like juggling. It's like
we're going against 400 plus years. Yes. It's like we have to counter condition ourselves, because everything around us says just the opposite. Yeah. And so we've got to, we cannot continue to co-sign our own ripoff. We have bought into that so much that we don't even realize what we're passing on to our daughters. Yeah. Right. And so I tell you guys, when she said that to me, and this was maybe like a year ago, she's almost 15. So this was like just before she turned 14. And I was like, okay, well, let me slow down. Right? Because I pride myself on practicing what I preach. I pride myself on, if I'm working with families, if I'm working with moms in particular, and I'm trying to help them get to the other side with being able to show up differently for their children, God forbid I'm a hypocrite in the process. And so, that's just one instance where I think we got to be able to slow ourselves down.
Absolutely, because even with the 3-year-old, she'll come to me and she'll say, "I'm mad at you." And then, there is the, Southern Black woman in me that's like, "What you got to be mad about? You're 3 years old, But I have to, reel that in and say, why are you upset?
Right.
Okay, well, it's okay to be mad sometimes, but, I said what I said because you have to, learn whatever. And so, the thing about it is, historically, Black parents didn't have the time the actual physical time to give long explanations of why you can't do this and say that. And so everything had to be so fast. And so I'm trying
and authoritarian, because our parenting styles more of like a top down, more like authoritarian, because the world around us, if you don't learn how to zip it and get wipe that smile, as I used to have to do when I was online, smack that off of your face, them folks is get ready to come for you. You get ready to leave up out of here, and I might not see you again.
Now, right? Dr. Johnson, I'm sorry. That was a perfect segue into our third question, about how do societal and self-perceptions of strength, fortitude, and low vulnerability contribute to the struggles with depression and anxiety? And how are they also obstacles to seeking treatment?
Well, I think that sometimes we either suppress how we feel, or we get so used to telling our story that we never heal from it, that we never slow down and take the time to heal from it. And that shows up therapeutically. First of all, I have found that there really isn't any SES, poor, middle class, wealthy, that really doesn't make a difference in terms of Black women presenting to treatment. In fact, I find that the more educated some of us are, the less open, the less receptive we are to be vulnerable in that way. And so what we wind up doing is we walk around denying ourselves, denying how we feel. That contributes to our depression, that contributes to our anxiety, that shows up in our relationships, because we're not being, if you're not authentic about who you are and how you feel, interpersonally, the person that you're married to or your significant other, they're not engaging with the real you either. And so that also contributes to interpersonal difficulties, where by the time you're ready to be authentic, the other person is like, I don't know what to do with this, because this is not the you that I'm used to. And so when we do present therapeutically, a lot of times we're there for a space where we can be vulnerable, but we won't even allow ourselves sometimes to be vulnerable. I know that that takes time, but sometimes we tend to historically, therapeutically, block and stifle our own process. We deny our feelings. We have these, we conflate our religious beliefs with therapeutically what's happening with us. Now hear me clearly, there is creative power. I do believe we do speak life and death out of this right here with our tongue. But there's a difference between speaking something into existence and acknowledging what's already there. And so a lot of times, therapeutically, even when I sit with some Black women therapeutically, there is this reluctance to really kind of be honest, to be explicit about what it is you're experiencing, how it is you're feeling, your difficulties, your frustrations as a mother, because there's a lot of shame I find within that. Like, if we just say, you know what, I just don't feel like being bothered with them today, or, this is just too much. Sometimes I wish I could have done something different. I don't judge that, but we need to be able to speak to that for what it is, and then help identify ways to effectively cope and transition through that. And so the anxiety a lot of times, and depression, looks like agitation, looks like irritability, looks like mood swings, a lot of mood swings. We oftentimes psychosomaticize our emotions. In other words, what we're feeling here shows up in physical symptoms in our bodies. And so, I'm sorry, what were you going to say, Monica?
So I was going to say, Dr. Johnson, that kind of combines two of our next questions.
Okay.
Because we were going to ask you about the prevalence, right, of depression, anxiety, PTSD within Black women, and what are some of the unique precipitating factors. And then we were going to ask you about the physical manifestations, because sometimes people aren't quite aware that what they're feeling physically could be a symptom of something going on with them mentally. So why don't you just go ahead and combine both of those, because you were already going there.
Got you. So I was shocked by this, but believe it or not, our prevalence rates of depression, anxiety, PTSD are not very different than other racial and ethnic groups of women in this country. What is different, however, is our willingness to seek out mental health treatment. That's where the difference is. And so some of the barriers that contribute to our willingness to seek out treatment is not always Tuskegee. Historically, the history of distrust between African-American community and the medical establishment. It's not always necessarily distrust. I just read an article about that in terms of how it's convenient for researchers and scholars, including Dr. Fauci, to push this narrative that is a reason why a lot of Black folk are reluctant to get the vaccine. That's not necessarily it. There's some hesitancy there. And the reason why there's some hesitancy there, based on the article, are some of the same reasons why there's hesitancy that presents as a barrier to seeking mental health treatment. A lot of times the communication between providers and us is very dismissive, is pejorative, is condescending. Outside of the fact that there may be financial concerns, there is also sometimes a lack of available or accessible representation to seek out those who look like you in terms of matching racially, ethnically. And so our prevalence rates aren't very different. It's just what we do in response. And there's still a lot of stigma around seeking out mental health treatment. It amazes me how many folks would rather go to coaching than to seek out a mental health provider. Nothing against coaching, but coaching is not mental health treatment. Coaching it can only take you but so far, but a lot of folks will try to make the two synonymous, because in some of our minds, it's still less shaming to say I'm working with a coach versus, or I have a psychiatry appointment today. And so what was the other part of your question, Monica? I'm trying to make sure I speak to everything.
The next question was about the physical manifestations.
Okay.
And how we ignore those.
Right.
And also, I'll go a step further and say also how they contribute to other issues that we as a community and as Black women deal with, diabetes, obesity, hypertension, and so on. Hypertension, exactly.
So another barrier related to that point is that the literature suggests that historically, for many African-American women, we will still prefer to seek out our primary care providers for medication to address anxiety or depression than to actually work with the psychiatrist. And let me be clear, many mental health conditions and disorders are rooted in brain biology, abnormal brain biology processes. However, the general practitioner, your family doctor, does not have the same level of expertise, skill set, monitoring some of these medications that your psychiatrist would. In fact, the medication that specifically works to lessen anxiety, to shift the brain biology around depression, the general practitioner can't give you that. That's something that you have to seek out a psychiatric nurse practitioner for, or a psychiatrist for. But we still tend to rather gravitate toward that general practitioner, even when the general practitioner refers us to a psychiatrist. And so that's something that by the time those concerns, those factors present therapeutically to me, I spend quite a bit of time unpacking, looking at health-seeking behaviors and attitudes. Because this is what we're really talking about, our attitudes, our perceptions, our responses, our behaviors to our attitudes. And so before I can even get to addressing the actual symptom, I have to really help someone or help them think through, okay, where do these perceptions come from? What are these attitudes rooted in? And then begin to look at, okay, what serves you, what doesn't serve you, as well as you would like it to. A lot of times when I work with African-American women, and the literature suggests there are a lot of co-occurring physical symptoms, physical illnesses, such as stress. Hypertension is still among one of the leading causes of death among African-American women. Sometimes we will stuff our emotions in the form of obesity, eating too much, overeating. But typically, the conditions, the physical manifestations that the literature suggests we tend to present a lot with, and that I see therapeutically, that I've seen over the last 20 plus years: hypertension, cardiovascular disease, headaches, a lot of significant migraines and headaches. And so if and when you present to your general practitioner, and remember I said that sometimes they don't really hear us, as you've pointed to, Kendra, historically, you know, how they perceive our pain or how they interpret our pain, they're not really listening to us. They are assuming, they're not taking their time really listening to what it is we're presenting to be able to consistently and effectively redirect us to a mental health professional. And then we wind up taking these medications that don't work, that don't make us feel any better. Well, duh, because it's like shooting at a target in the dark.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we're engaging in these behaviors that, and we're still not hitting the bullseye. Then a lot of times that leaves a bad taste in our mouths, for the lack of a better phrase, because then, you know, by the time somebody else comes along and really wants to prescribe medications that are effective, well, that doesn't work. I tried that before.
Yeah. Can I interject really quick to talk about perfectionism as a barrier to seeking treatment? Black women, especially, I find college-educated Black women and Black women who are pioneers in their fields, we don't want to be seen as not having it all together. Mm-mm. And so as a result of that, you know, we're not even going to say to our friends and colleagues, like, I'm struggling with this, or, you know, I have too much on my plate, or, you know, anything like that, because of our desire to appear perfect. And I have found that, like, you know, particularly in my own life, that, you know, wanting to present that it's all good, you know, really affected me at a certain point, and fortunately led me to seek mental health counseling. But it is a, you know, it is a burden on the Black woman to feel that we need to have it all together. We have to hold up all the plates. And if one thing falls, or even if we put one thing down, we are failing. And so we have to do a better job as a community to express to one another and to the young women, you know, coming up after us, that taking care of yourself is a part of good living, is a part of, you know, having it all together, is saying that when you don't. And so, yeah, that's a difficulty that a lot of Black women are facing, because at a certain point in time in the professional world, you know, historically, or even on the plantation, you couldn't say, you know, I'm really struggling today. I'm feeling kind of down. You're down? Okay, well, you're fired. Oh, you're down, you're moving too slow. Okay, well, I'm going to beat you. And so, you know, now that we are not as much in that same predicament, we have to encourage each other to express when we need help.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Very powerful. Time is running away from us. Time is running away from us. And I really appreciate you all, both of you, sharing so much of your personal selves. I think that everyone who is in attendance and listening on Facebook can really relate. I'm going to skip to our last question that we had for you as a committee. This has been very, very heavy topic. So I was wondering if you could give us some insight on how to better balance what is good about the strong woman archetype and what hinders us or bogs us down. How can we balance it? For instance, Kendra, both of you have said that, you know, there's something that you needed that fortitude that was instilled in you by your mother to handle the things, Kendra, when you were in graduate school. That made you capable of getting the 4.0 and finishing the degree and such. But then on the other hand, you know, just how do you find the balance? Can you tell us how we find the balance, how we can manage it?
For me personally, I would say that I have turned the myth of the strong Black woman on its head a little bit, because to me personally, I find my strength in my vulnerability. Mm-hmm. I find my strength in the fact that I can be falling apart. I find my strength in the fact that I am going to cry when I need to. I find my strength in the fact that I'm going to say, I need a break. I find my strength in saying no. And so in those ways, I say, yes, I am a strong Black woman, but I am strong because I am willing to express my vulnerability, to allow myself the full range of emotions. When I am happy, I am over the moon and everybody gonna know about it. And when I am sad, you know, I fully allow myself to experience that sadness. And I may not tell everybody, but the people who need to know, hey, I am experiencing difficulty. I may need to lean on you. I have made it a point to find a partner who will allow me to express, you know, all of my emotions with him, or, you know, he doesn't shut down when I say, you know, I'm having a rough day emotionally. I have, you know, family and friends and a partner who support me going to therapy. All of those things I think make me strong, and me suppressing myself doesn't have to be what makes me strong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And you, Dr. Johnson?
I don't like the strong Black woman archetype, because historically what that has suggested and what that meant as it related to our oppression, our dehumanization. But I do think that there are still aspects of strength, aspects of resilience there. That archetype is rooted in our survival, mm-hmm. and our preservation. And so we have the blood of our ancestors pulsating through each of us as a result of that. Yeah. And so in that way, I celebrate that.
Yeah.
You know, as God told Joshua when they came into Canaan, I want you to build your stones of remembrance. And so to commemorate that legacy, to commemorate how far we've come, and to celebrate that. But at the same time, I think that in commemorating how far we've come and how we got there, I think we need to be able to slow it down and also be able to allow ourselves to be appropriately vulnerable when we need to. And I think that's where the real strength lies for us in 2021 in particular. For us to not only continue to be survivors, but to be overcomers, to be able to break free from a lot of those yokes of that emotional bondage, that grip, that anxiety, that depression that our trauma has on us when we deny it. Because when we deny those experiences, we deny aspects of ourselves. And when we deny aspects of ourselves, we don't fully show up with our significant others and with our children. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we have got to be more purposeful to really begin to find at least one person where we can allow ourselves to be vulnerable with when we need to be. Because that's a stone of remembrance that I'd like to pass on to my daughter. That's a stone of remembrance that I'd like to pass on to the other children that my husband and I are standing in faith for God to bless us with. Mm-hmm. That's the stone of remembrance that I'd like to pass on to my clients, to every person that I interact with as a psychologist and in ministry. And so to really kind of begin to look at our vulnerability, not as a weakness, but as a strength, appropriately able to be vulnerable.
I also believe so deeply in the strength in both sisterhood and tribe as a whole.
Yes.
I would not be who I am without the women who have poured into me and the women that I have been able to pour into. And so, you know, I preach tribe to anybody who will listen. Find your people and build your life with those people. Because when you have people you know are going to take care of you, you know, have your back, it's so much easier to be vulnerable. It's so much easier to create space for all of the emotions, happiness, sadness, anger, frustration, when you know you have people who will listen to you with an open heart, who aren't going to judge you. You know, tribe is so very important. And so I encourage Black women to make sure that they have those people in their lives who they know that they can go to, who will take care of them.
Thank you so much, both of you. Very powerful stories, personal stories, I think really resonate with people. Let's see if we have any questions in the chat from the audience. I'm seeing that we have no questions. If anyone's out there and they want to just throw one in there now that they haven't put in, we do have some comments, and I can just quickly mention them. One attendee says she's been there, was called ignorant in front of her entire cohort in school, and the professor just sat silent. Another mentioned, you know, that she loved the comment about loving yourself deliberately. Another attendee mentioned that our bodies don't lie. You know, they tell us. We often don't listen to them, but they do tell us. We got a yes, preach on here. We have a tribe has saved my life on more than one occasion. From Facebook, allow ourselves our full range of emotions. So while no questions, your stories that you shared and your wisdom and your scholarly information has resonated with those folks who attended this evening. Do you have anything else that you want to add just very quickly? Because amazingly, we are at 8:13 and we are running out of time. that just means it was good, you know.
Monica, I do have a question.
Yes.
How has the impact of COVID and isolation affected the patients that you're seeing, Dr. Johnson?
Believe it or not, I have been getting more referrals from Black women as it relates to their children. In particular, see, a lot of times what moves us or what finally pushes us one direction or another is when our children become unsettled. And so, right? And so even if we deny ourselves or press through or just push past things as best as we can, when our children begin to emote, that compels us to respond differently. And so COVID and isolation, I've been seeing a lot of mothers and families present with difficulties related to virtual schooling, with difficulties relating to, you know, how mothers in particular are at home. So now they have to manage or help to facilitate online education and their virtual work duties. And so, believe it or not, a lot of the moms I have been seeing have been more explicit about their feelings, about what it is they need, because, you know, nothing warrants a response more than necessity. And so I actually have been finding that some of the mothers that typically wouldn't come to me are now showing up a lot differently. And so, you know, because they got to respond differently because their children, it's in the home all the time. And so, you know, that's not something that, you know, a lot of mothers are just going to sit there and just like not do something about. So in terms of COVID, the pandemic, and the lockdowns, I've been seeing a lot more families and a lot more moms in particular.
Thank you.
Oh, excuse me. That was, say hi. She just came back from basketball practice.
Hi.
That's LJ.
If there's no more questions, I do have one just to kind of put us on a high note, to end on a high note. Linda, are there any more questions out there before I ask this?
No, you're good.
Okay. So what, from both of you, what are some suggestions about, like, practical, tangible suggestions on that we can use to promote health and mental wellness? Besides going to therapy, just some easy things that are tangible and there that we may not think about.
I tell people all the time, move, go for a walk, dance. Just moving your body can, you know, help release a lot of tension. And so, you know, my advice is always move, drink water, and eat your fruits and vegetables. Because, you know, those are really so underrated. People don't value them enough. And so, you know, especially moving, incorporating more movement into my life has been so beneficial for me.
Okay.
I think for me, a lot of times when I tend to tell moms, you have to take space, they're like, what? And so their eyes glaze over and they're like, I don't know if I can trust you. You're talking about something. What's going to happen if I do that? And so, you know, baby steps. And so what I do is that I try to help people feel okay. 5 minutes, because someone will say, well, I don't have a whole day, or I don't have a half a day. Doc, I don't even have an hour. So I'm like 3 to 5 minutes, rather than just pressing through constantly. If you gotta pee, pee. I tell you guys, just in terms of, somebody said our bodies don't lie. I cannot tell you how many times I have moms running into my office with me, trying to hurry up and get there so they won't be late. And the woman hasn't used the restroom in 2 or 3 hours. And so, you know, they run in and they're like, oh my God, doc. And so I'm like, just slow down. Go to the restroom. It's okay. It's okay. Something very tangible and practical like that, 3 to 5 minutes, even 3 minutes. Just get used to getting to the habit more consistently, be more deliberate about taking a small break when you need to. Might not be able to necessarily practically or financially be able to take a whole weekend to yourself or even a whole day to yourself, but 3 to 5 minutes, learn how to decompress slowly over time like that.
All right. Thank you. This has been amazing. Absolutely amazing. You both told me that you were really excited about doing this, and all that came through. So before we close out, I'm going to ask that the questions that we let off with in the beginning be put back up, and those who are still on the line, if you could answer those questions again for us. They'll be about 30 seconds a piece for you to, and let's just see if there's been any changes in opinions.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Georgette. I appreciate that. Thank you. Oh, that's a blessing. That's good.
All right, let's see what we came up with. Do you view the strong Black woman archetype to be a myth? Positive 5%, negative 11, both 84. I think that was some movement.
A little.
But I don't have the pre. I feel like both with some movement, but let's see what the next one is. So that didn't move. We started off with a really good crowd of people here who say they are definitely open to seeing someone. So that's pretty powerful and hopeful. 92% is really high. So.
That is high. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's higher than I thought it would be. I think
yes,
most of the committee members.
Yeah, not compelled by courts or child welfare. I am thankful for that. Thankful.
Yes, yes. I'm sure that changes amongst populations though, and social economic groups and such. So, all right. If there are no more questions out there, I'm going to thank you so much, both of you, for coming on, giving us your time. You see the positive comments that are coming on the screen, and people have enjoyed you. I ask that the attendees please click on the link that's in your chat so you can do your evaluation. We'd like to bring some more programs to you next year, and we'd like to do some planning with your input. And again, thank you very much. Yes.
If anyone wants to, follow up with me, my email address is drj@jarchealth@jarchealth.org. You can follow me on Doc Dion Johnson Williams, Facebook, Instagram. I'm at Doc Dion on Twitter, and Truth and Heart with Doc or Dion Johnson Williams is my YouTube channel. So thank you for your time.
Excuse me, Dr. Johnson, can
Yes.
you put that information in the chat?
In the chat.
Okay, wait a minute. Now let me try and be technologically astute.
But you have Instagram.
Look, listen, disclosure, y'all, a little bit of honesty. When Monica asked me to do it, Monica, I tell you, I was so excited. I was like, yes, I get to get out the house. Then you said Zoom. I was like, not the most proficient in Zoom. So bear with me, y'all. I'm going to type it right now in the chat.
Kendra, do you have any closing remarks or anything you want to, put out there?
I'm just really grateful to be a part of this. It's always great to be able to do something with my sorors. I really appreciate you all. And I appreciate Carrie Alexander for recommending me to you all. It's really been a privilege. If anyone would like to get in touch with me to do anything history related, genealogies, anything like that, you can reach me at kendra.woodfolk@bison.howard.edu, and I
start typing. All right, everyone, a slide is going to come up with resources, and I think it's also going to appear in your chat. And with that, we are going to close out for the evening. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Very informative.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Dr. Johnson.
Was that a me?
Yeah.
Oh, Lord.
Hey, what happened?
Very good.
Hi, you're still here.
We're still live.
Good evening, everybody. Take care.
Good night.
Have a great day.